Have you ever been in a room full of people who thought they knew everything about you, only to realize they knew absolutely nothing at all? Have you ever felt that burning sensation in your chest when someone dismisses your hard work, your dreams, your entire existence with a casual laugh and a condescending smile? Well, let me tell you what happened to me at a dinner party that changed everything. A night that started with humiliation and ended with me calmly revealing a truth that left everyone speechless. I remember sitting at that long mahogany table, the kind that screams old money and inherited wealth, surrounded by my partner's family and their circle of successful friends, all of them dressed in their expensive clothes, sipping wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget back then. The conversation had been flowing easily until someone, my partner's cousin David, asked me about my work with that tone. You know the one. That fake interested tone that already suggests they've made up their mind about you before you even open your mouth. I told him I worked in social media management for small businesses, helping them build their online presence, create content strategies, and connect with their audiences. The silence that followed was deafening. And then it came. That laugh. That collective chuckle that rippled around the table like a wave of judgment. David smirked and said something about how cute it was that I had a little hobby job, how nice that I could play around on Instagram all day. And someone else chimed in asking if I made real money or just worked for exposure and free products. My partner squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture meant to comfort, but that only made me feel more isolated, more different, more less than everyone else in that room. I felt my face flush, that familiar heat of embarrassment and anger mixing together in my veins, but I kept my composure because I had learned over the years that silence can be more powerful than any defensive outburst. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine as they sat there in their bubble of privilege and assumptions, was that just 3 days before that dinner, I had closed on my second house, a beautiful property that I had purchased entirely with money I had earned from my so-called little job, money that I had saved and invested carefully while they were busy judging me. But I didn't say anything yet. I let them laugh, let them enjoy their moment of superiority, because I knew that the right moment would come. And when it did, the impact would be so much sweeter. Growing up, I never imagined that my life would take the path it did. And I certainly never dreamed that I would one day be in a position to purchase not just one, but 2 houses before the age of 35. My childhood was modest, comfortable enough, but far from luxurious, and my parents instilled in me a strong work ethic and the belief that success wasn't handed to you, but earned through dedication and smart choices. I studied communications in college, graduating with decent grades but no clear direction. No burning passion for a specific career path that seemed to promise the stability and prestige that society tells us we should want. I tried the traditional corporate route for a few years, working in marketing departments for companies that treated employees like replaceable parts in a machine, where creativity was suffocated by bureaucracy, and where I felt my soul slowly dying with each passing day. The breaking point came when I was passed over for a promotion that I had worked tirelessly for, watching as it went to someone with better connections but less experience. And I realized that climbing the corporate ladder meant sacrificing too much of myself, too much of my time, too much of my mental health and personal fulfillment. So I did something that terrified me and excited me in equal measure. I quit my stable job with its predictable paycheck and health benefits, and I started freelancing in social media management, a field that back then was still relatively new and definitely not taken seriously by most people. My parents were worried, my friends thought I was making a huge mistake, and the person I was dating at the time left me because they couldn't see a future with someone who didn't have a real career. But I felt alive for the first time in years. I felt like I was finally taking control of my own destiny instead of letting someone else dictate my worth and my potential. The early days were rough, I won't sugarcoat it. There were months when I barely made enough to cover my rent and basic expenses. Times when I questioned whether I had made a terrible mistake and should just crawl back to corporate life with my tail between my legs. But something kept me going. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was faith in myself, or maybe it was just the pure refusal to let everyone who doubted me be proven right. I started small, taking on clients who couldn't afford big marketing agencies, small business owners who were passionate about their products but had no idea how to navigate the digital landscape. I threw myself into learning everything I could about algorithms, content creation, audience psychology, and business strategy, spending countless late nights researching, experimenting, failing, learning, and trying again. What they laughed at that night, what they dismissed as a little job, was actually a thriving business that I had built from the ground up with nothing but my laptop, my creativity, and an unshakable determination to prove that success doesn't have to look the way society expects it to look. Social media management, the thing that people love to mock as not being a real job, had become my passion and my goldmine because I understood something that many traditional businesses were slow to grasp, that the digital world was where the future of commerce and connection lived. I wasn't just posting pretty pictures on Instagram or scheduling random tweets. I was crafting comprehensive marketing strategies, analyzing data to optimize performance, building authentic relationships between brands and their audiences, and ultimately driving real revenue for my clients. My typical day started early, usually around 6 in the morning, when I would review analytics from the previous day's posts, check on any campaigns that were running, and respond to messages from clients across different time zones. Then I would dive into content creation, which meant everything from writing compelling copy that converted browsers into buyers, to designing graphics that stopped people mid-scroll, to filming and editing videos that told stories and built emotional connections. People see the final polished post and think it took 5 minutes. They don't see the hours of strategy that went into determining the right message for the right audience at the right time. They don't see the constant learning and adapting required to keep up with ever-changing algorithms and trends, and they certainly don't see the emotional labor of managing multiple client relationships, each with their own needs, expectations, and occasional crises. But I loved it. Every challenging, exhausting, rewarding minute of it. Because I was building something that was entirely mine, and I was helping other people build their dreams too. My client base grew steadily as word spread about the results I was delivering. Small businesses that were struggling to get noticed online started seeing significant increases in engagement, followers, and most importantly, sales. I specialized in working with local businesses, restaurants that needed to fill tables, boutiques that needed to move inventory, service providers who needed to book appointments, and I developed a reputation for being able to take a business's unique story and translate it into content that resonated with their ideal customers. The income started to grow, slowly at first, but then more substantially as I raised my rates to reflect my experience and the value I was providing. I was strategic about my finances in a way that I had never been when I had a corporate job. I tracked every expense. I set aside money for taxes. I invested in tools and education that would make me more efficient and effective. And most importantly, I saved aggressively with a specific goal in mind. I wanted to buy a house. Building my business in silence, without fanfare or constant social media updates about my success, was a deliberate choice that shaped not only my professional journey, but also my personal philosophy about achievement and validation. I watched so many entrepreneurs and freelancers get caught up in the performance of success, posting constantly about their wins, their earnings, their lifestyle, as if they needed the world's applause to confirm that what they were doing mattered. But I learned early on that the more you broadcast your moves, the more opinions and negativity you invite into your space. And I needed to protect my energy and my focus for the actual work, rather than the perception of the work. My friends and family knew I was doing social media management, but they didn't know the full scope of what I was accomplishing because I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone except myself. When I landed my first 5-figure client, a local restaurant chain that wanted to revamp their entire digital presence, I celebrated quietly with a nice dinner alone, taking time to acknowledge how far I had come from those early days of scraping together enough clients to pay rent. When I had my first month earning more than I ever had in my corporate job, I didn't post about it or brag to the people who had doubted me. I simply smiled to myself and reinvested that money back into my business and my savings. This approach of building in silence meant that I avoided a lot of the jealousy and negativity that can come when people see you succeeding, especially when you're succeeding in a way that challenges their beliefs about what legitimate work looks like. It also meant that I was constantly underestimated, which honestly worked in my favor because people's low expectations gave me the freedom to exceed them dramatically without the pressure of having to maintain a certain image. My daily routine during those building years was intense and required a level of discipline that I didn't know I possessed. I would wake up early, work on my clients' accounts during the morning hours when I was most creative and focused, take a break in the afternoon for exercise and personal tasks, and then spend my evenings learning new skills, whether that was taking online courses in advanced marketing techniques, studying successful campaigns from other industries, or networking in online communities with other professionals who were pushing the boundaries of digital marketing. I said no to a lot of social invitations, not because I didn't want to see my friends, but because I was so focused on building something sustainable and scalable that I knew required short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. People thought I was antisocial or obsessed with work, but what they didn't understand was that I wasn't just working, I was creating freedom. I was building a foundation that would allow me to live life on my own terms, without having to ask anyone's permission or fit into someone else's box of what success should look like. The journey to my first house was filled with research, planning, and a kind of excited nervousness that kept me up at night imagining what it would feel like to own property, to have a space that was truly mine, that couldn't be taken away by a landlord's decision to sell or raise the rent. I had been renting a small apartment for years, watching my monthly payments disappear into someone else's investment. And while the freedom of renting had its advantages, I craved the stability and the asset-building potential of homeownership. I started researching the real estate market in my area, attending open houses on weekends, talking to mortgage brokers about what I would need for a down payment, and crunching numbers to figure out what I could realistically afford without overextending myself financially. The conventional wisdom said that someone with a non-traditional income like mine would have trouble getting approved for a mortgage, that banks preferred the perceived stability of a W-2 employee over the variable income of a freelancer, but I was determined to prove that wrong. I worked with a mortgage broker who specialized in self-employed borrowers, and I meticulously organized 2 years of tax returns, bank statements, and client contracts to demonstrate that my income wasn't just consistent, but actually growing year over year. The process was more complicated than it would have been if I had a traditional job, requiring extra documentation and scrutiny, but I jumped through every hoop with a smile because I knew that I was building the exact case that would get me approved. When I finally got the pre-approval letter stating that I qualified for a mortgage up to a certain amount, I felt a surge of validation that was almost overwhelming. Here was a conservative financial institution, the epitome of traditional gatekeepers, officially recognizing that my little job generated enough income and stability to invest in me as a borrower. I started seriously house hunting, looking at properties that met my criteria of being in a good location, with potential for appreciation, having enough space for a dedicated home office since I worked from home, and being within a price range that would allow me to maintain my quality of life while building equity. After months of searching, countless open houses, and a few near misses with properties that went to other buyers, I found it, a charming 3-bedroom house in an up-and-coming neighborhood, with good bones, a decent-sized backyard, and that intangible quality that made it feel like home the moment I walked through the door. The negotiation process was intense, going back and forth with the seller on price and terms, having the home inspection which revealed some issues that needed to be addressed, and navigating all the complex paperwork that comes with a real estate transaction. But I stayed focused and calm, treating it like any other business deal, which in many ways it was. Perhaps the most important business deal of my life at that point. The day I closed on that first house, sitting in the title company's office signing what felt like hundreds of pages while trying to process the magnitude of what I was doing, I felt a mixture of pride, terror, and pure joy that brought tears to my eyes. When I received the keys and walked into my house, not a rental, not someone else's property, but mine, I stood in the empty living room and let myself cry, releasing years of hard work, doubt, sacrifice, and determination that had led to this moment. Have you ever worked so hard for something that when you finally achieve it, you almost can't believe it's real? That's exactly how I felt, and I took a photo of myself holding those keys, not to post online, but just to remember that feeling, that moment when I proved to myself that betting on me had been the right choice all along. My success didn't stop with that first house because I wasn't content to simply maintain what I had achieved. I wanted to keep growing, keep challenging myself, and keep building a portfolio that would provide financial security and freedom for my future. After purchasing my first home, I continued to work hard on my business, taking on more high-value clients, raising my rates to reflect my increased expertise and the demand for my services, and starting to build systems that would allow me to scale without burning out. I hired my first contractor, another freelancer who specialized in graphic design, which freed up my time to focus on strategy and client relationships rather than spending hours creating every single visual asset myself. This decision to delegate was difficult because I had been a one-woman operation for so long and had controlling tendencies about my work, but it was necessary for growth, and it taught me valuable lessons about trust, collaboration, and the difference between being busy and being productive. My income continued to increase, and I was diligent about saving a significant portion of it, living well below my means despite the fact that I could have afforded a more lavish lifestyle. While my peers were upgrading their cars, taking expensive vacations, and buying designer clothes, I was funneling money into my savings and investment accounts, keeping my eye on the long-term goal of financial independence rather than short-term gratification. I started educating myself about real estate investing, reading books, listening to podcasts, and joining online communities where people discuss strategies for building wealth through property. The idea of buying a second house started as a vague possibility, but gradually became a concrete goal, as I realized that I had the income to support another mortgage, and that real estate could be a powerful vehicle for building wealth beyond just having a place to live. I began researching investment properties, looking at areas with strong rental demand, good schools, and economic growth indicators that suggested property values would appreciate over time. My strategy was to buy a second property that I could rent out, using the rental income to cover most or all of the mortgage payment while the property appreciated in value, essentially having tenants buy an asset for me while I built equity. The search for the right investment property took several months because I was even more careful and analytical than I had been when buying my primary residence. This was a business decision that needed to make financial sense on paper, not just feel good emotionally. I looked at dozens of properties, ran the numbers on cash flow and return on investment, consulted with a real estate agent who specialized in investment properties, and finally found a great opportunity. A well-maintained two-bedroom condo in a neighborhood that was rapidly developing, priced below market value because the seller needed to close quickly. I moved fast, getting my financing in order, making a strong offer, and navigating the purchase process with the confidence of someone who had been through it before. The closing on my second house happened just 3 days before that fateful dinner party, and I was still processing the accomplishment, still feeling that incredible high that comes from achieving a major goal, when I found myself sitting at that table listening to people laugh at my career. The dinner party, which I mentioned at the beginning of this story, was supposed to be a celebration of my partner's promotion at their law firm, a gathering of their family and colleagues to toast their success and enjoy an evening of good food and conversation. I had been dating this person for about a year, and while our relationship had its challenges, mainly stemming from the different worlds we came from, I cared about them and wanted to be supportive of their achievements. Their family was old money, the kind of people who valued pedigree, traditional career paths, and the appearance of success above almost everything else. And I had always felt like an outsider in their world, someone who didn't quite belong despite my partner's assurances that I was accepted and valued. The dinner started pleasantly enough, with cocktails and small talk about politics, recent vacations, and various social events that I had no knowledge of or connection to. But I smiled and nodded and tried to participate where I could. When we sat down for the main course, an elaborate spread prepared by a private chef because of course these people didn't cook their own dinner parties, the conversation turned to career and ambitions, with various people around the table sharing updates about their work in law, finance, medicine, and other prestigious fields. I mostly stayed quiet during this part, not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I had learned that in circles like this, non-traditional careers were often met with confusion or condescension, and I didn't have the energy to defend or explain myself to people who had already made up their minds about what constituted legitimate success. But then David, who I mentioned earlier, directly asked me what I did for work, and I couldn't avoid answering without seeming rude or ashamed. So I told him, simply and honestly, that I managed social media for small businesses, and I watched his face go through a series of reactions, first confusion as he tried to understand what that meant, then barely concealed amusement as he processed that I made my living through Instagram and Facebook, and finally that patronizing smile that suggested he thought I was adorable for having my little hobby. The laugh that followed my explanation wasn't malicious exactly, it was more dismissive. The kind of laugh that says without words that what you do doesn't really count, doesn't really matter, isn't really a legitimate contribution to society the way their important jobs in law and finance were. Someone made a joke about influencers and getting paid in exposure. Someone else asked if I had a real retirement plan or was planning to post my way into old age. And my partner, bless them, tried to redirect the conversation, but the damage was done. The judgment had been passed. And I was sitting there feeling smaller and more insignificant with each passing moment. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you power that people don't see coming. And I had a card up my sleeve that I was waiting for the perfect moment to play. The perfect moment came about 30 minutes later, when the conversation had moved on to real estate, and someone was talking about how difficult it was to break into the property market these days, how young people were forever destined to rent because buying a home was becoming impossible without family help or inheritance. Multiple people around the table were nodding in agreement, sharing their own stories of how they had purchased their homes, almost always with significant help from parents or through family connections that got them favorable deals. Someone mentioned that they had just helped their son with a down payment on a condo, and others chimed in with similar stories of providing financial assistance to their adult children because the market was just too difficult to navigate alone. David, perhaps feeling emboldened by the earlier laughter at my expense, turned to me and said something that I will never forget. He said with that same patronizing smile, "I'm sure you're doing fine with your social media thing, but you must find it frustrating watching everyone around you buying property and building real wealth while you're still renting, right? But don't worry, maybe if you save up for a few more years and get some help, you might be able to afford something small." The assumption in his statement, the absolute certainty that I was struggling financially and living paycheck to paycheck because my job couldn't possibly be lucrative, was so absurd that I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I took a sip of my wine, set down my glass carefully, and looked around the table at all these people who thought they knew my story, my worth, my financial situation based solely on their prejudices about what my work was. I smiled, a genuine smile that came from a place of quiet confidence and satisfaction. And I said in the calmest, most matter-of-fact voice I could manage, "Actually, I just closed on my second house 3 days ago. Bought it outright with money from my little job. No family help, no inheritance, just me and my Instagram posts." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room, and I watched as comprehension slowly dawned on their faces as they tried to reconcile what I had just said with their assumptions about me. David's face went through several shades of red. My partner looked at me with wide eyes because I hadn't told them yet about the second house, wanting to surprise them at a better moment than this, and several people literally had their mouths hanging open in shock. I continued, because now that I had started, I felt like the full truth deserved to be told. The first house I bought 2 years ago, a 3-bedroom in Riverside that's already appreciated 30% since I purchased it. The second one, which I just bought, is a condo that I'm going to rent out for passive income. Both purchased with money I earned from managing social media, from creating content, from understanding digital marketing in a way that drives real business results and generates real revenue. My little job, as you called it, has made me more money in the last year than I ever made in corporate America, and it's given me the freedom to build wealth on my own terms without asking anyone for permission or help. I wasn't being mean or vindictive. I was simply stating facts. But the impact of those facts in that room at that moment was seismic. The aftermath of that revelation was fascinating to witness because it revealed so much about human nature, about how people react when their assumptions are shattered, and about how our society values certain types of work over others based on perception rather than reality. Some people at the table immediately became warmer and more interested in me, suddenly wanting to know all about my business, asking questions about social media strategy, mentioning that they knew someone who could use my services, treating me like I had just gained membership to a club that I hadn't been allowed into before. Others became defensive, finding ways to diminish what I had shared, suggesting that I must have gotten lucky, or that the real estate market in my area must be cheap, anything to avoid confronting their own prejudices, and the fact that they had been wrong about me. David, to his credit, eventually apologized later in the evening, admitting that he had made assumptions based on stereotypes about social media work and that he was impressed by what I had accomplished, though I could tell the apology was more about saving face than genuine understanding. My partner was proud but also a bit hurt that I hadn't shared such significant news with them first, and we had a long conversation later that night about communication and why I had felt the need to keep my achievements private. The truth was that I had been protecting myself from exactly what happened at dinner, from judgment and dismissal and the exhausting task of constantly defending my choices to people who had already decided what my life should look like. But having to defend myself one more time, having to endure that humiliation before revealing my truth, had been cathartic in a way because it showed me definitively that I didn't need anyone's approval or validation, that my success was real regardless of whether these people acknowledged it or not. In the days and weeks following that dinner, word spread through my partner's social circle about what had happened, and I became somewhat of a curiosity, the girl who bought 2 houses through Instagram. Some people reached out to me for business advice, others for investment tips, and a few simply to satisfy their curiosity about how someone could make real money doing something they had always dismissed as frivolous. I answered questions when I felt like it, declined to elaborate when I didn't, and continued focusing on my business and my life with the same intensity and privacy that had gotten me this far. The experience taught me that you don't owe anyone an explanation for your success, that sometimes the best response to judgment is simply to keep building quietly until your results speak louder than their opinions ever could. Looking back on that entire experience now, several years later, I can see it as a pivotal moment in my journey toward truly owning my worth and my path without apology. That dinner party could have broken me, could have made me doubt my choices or feel shame about my career, but instead it became the moment when I fully stepped into my power, and realized that I had nothing to prove to anyone except myself. The houses, as significant as they were financially, represented something even more important than wealth or assets. They represented freedom, validation, and the courage to bet on myself when everyone else was betting against me. Since that night, I've continued to grow my business, now managing a team of contractors and serving higher-end clients who pay premium rates for my expertise. I've purchased 2 more investment properties, building a real estate portfolio that generates passive income and appreciates in value, creating the financial foundation that will eventually allow me to retire early if I choose to, or to pivot to new ventures without financial stress. My relationship with my partner ultimately didn't work out. Not because of the dinner party incident, but because we realized we had fundamentally different values and life goals. And I'm now with someone who not only respects my work, but is inspired by my entrepreneurial spirit and independence. My relationship with my partner's family improved somewhat after that night, though there's still an underlying tension that comes from their realization that they misjudged me so severely. But I no longer need their approval or acceptance because I've built a life that fulfills me on my own terms. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this is that society will always try to put you in boxes, to define success in narrow terms that serve the existing power structures, and that breaking free from those expectations requires both courage and a thick skin. There will always be people who look down on your choices, who laugh at your dreams, who dismiss your achievements because they don't fit the traditional mold of success, but their opinions matter only if you give them power. I chose to take back my power, to define success for myself, and to build a life that might look unconventional from the outside, but feels authentic and fulfilling from the inside where it actually matters. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. And I really hope this resonates with you because it comes from a place of hard-won wisdom and genuine desire to help others avoid the pain and doubt that I experienced. First, never let anyone else define your worth or your potential based on what they think your career should look like, because chances are they have no idea what they're talking about, and they're projecting their own fears and limitations onto you. Second, building wealth and success doesn't have to follow the traditional path of corporate climbing and prestigious job titles. There are infinite ways to create value in this world, and to be compensated for that value. And the digital economy has opened up opportunities that didn't exist for previous generations. Third, work in silence and let your results speak for themselves, because constant broadcasting of your journey invites unnecessary negativity and drains energy that could be spent actually building something meaningful. Fourth, be strategic with your money, save aggressively, invest wisely, and prioritize long-term financial security over short-term status symbols, because true wealth is about freedom and options, not about impressing people who don't really care about you anyway. Fifth, when people doubt you or dismiss you, use that as fuel rather than letting it defeat you, because there's no sweeter victory than proving wrong the people who underestimated you simply by living well and achieving your goals. And finally, remember that the journey is long and there will be moments of doubt and frustration. But if you stay focused on your vision, work harder than anyone expects, and refuse to let other people's limitations become your own, you can accomplish things that seem impossible from where you're standing right now. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated or dismissed because of your career choice or your dreams? Have you ever had to defend your path to people who couldn't see your vision? Share your story in the comments below because I genuinely want to know that I'm not alone in this experience and because your story might inspire someone else who's struggling with the same doubts and judgments. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about success and worth, please leave a like because it helps me know that this content resonates with you and encourages me to share more of my journey and lessons. I invite you to subscribe to Living Through It because this channel is all about real stories from real people who are navigating life's challenges, building success on their own terms, and refusing to let society's expectations limit their potential. We share stories of resilience, transformation, and triumph over adversity. And I promise you'll find content here that inspires you, challenges you, and reminds you that you're not alone in whatever you're going through. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story because we post regularly, and each story has the power to change your perspective or give you the courage to keep going when things get tough. Thank you for listening to my story, for allowing me to be vulnerable with you, and for being part of this community of people who believe that success looks different for everyone and that the only opinion that truly matters is your own. Remember, they can laugh at your little job, they can dismiss your dreams, they can underestimate your potential, but they can't stop you from building the life you want if you're willing to work for it, believe in yourself, and ignore the noise. Keep building. Keep growing. and keep proving them wrong simply by living your truth and achieving your goals. I'll see you in the next story, and until then, keep living through it with courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that you are capable of so much more than anyone else thinks.